Hi, this is the Philosophical Angle, and I am your host, the Philosophical Angle, along with Rick Samuelson. Rick is a venture capitalist out on the West Coast and has graduated from Yale. And good to see you, Rick.
Good to see you. Happy New Year.
The purpose of the Philosophical Angle is to analyze the nature and essence of concepts being used in current media. And something of importance came along on the New York Times, a front page editorial, which was entitled, and let's bring that up, "The End the Gun Epidemic in America" on December 4th, 2015. Well, this kind of brought up a topic of interest. We all know that the New York Times is leaning to the left, and we kind of wondered, why does the left in general not like guns? So the Obama administration doesn't like it. Hillary Clinton, as a campaign candidate for the presidency, doesn't like it. Um, so it's clear the left doesn't like guns. So before we go into the details, and we'll bring up that article again, let's let's go and discuss this a little bit more formally in the, let's see if I can bring up my article or my diagram. And first we kind of ask why the left doesn't like guns, as we have, and we've noted the New York Times editorial. Well, the government, the New York Times government and the article, and the government in general doesn't like guns. That is the Democrats don't like guns because they believe that the government should be relied upon because the individual inherently is not good. And the individual will, and the reason that they don't like guns is that the individual, they believe, will try to take advantage of others. The individual will exploit others, and therefore a transactional event will always result in an unequal result. And an unequal result is not fair. And it is caused by exploitative actions of one party over another. And thus the left wants to eliminate this exploitative behavior because its ultimate objective is fairness. And this fairness is the cause of why the left believes that government should be relied upon to solve society's problems. Thus, the government should be the only one to have guns. And we'll go back to the New York Times editorial to see how this rings true. So let's explore the right, the conservatives. The conservative right prefers the individual to handle his own problems because he believes that the individual is inherently capable of doing so and is overall good. He's inherently good. He believes that the individual enters into a transaction to not be exploitative, but to produce a product or service and receive a reward. And this product and service that they produce is inherently good. That is, you're producing something that another person needs or wants, and and upon the sale you receive a reward. So both sides are receiving goodness. But what is the essence of this word exploitative? What do or did Marx and Engels and all the communists and socialists mean by exploiting. It means that the individual goes into the transaction to receive intentionally, to get more than he puts in, which would be unfair. That is, he unfairly enters the transaction to get and receive more than he puts in. The left believes that an individual naturally strives to get more unfairly out of the others with whom they are cooperating. Okay. However, the conservative believes that exploitative behavior is possible but not normal, while the left believes that when the rich hire the poor, that the transaction is ipso facto exploitation because the outcome is unfair. Well, individuals go into transactions to cooperate and receive commensurate rewards for their sacrifices. And they do so because they believe that their sacrifice is producing a good product, and the reward that they receive for producing that good product is also good. Let's take an example. The rich can hire a poor person and not be exploitative because of the amount of knowledge and risk employed by the wealthy employer is greater on his side than the other side, which is, say, when he hires a poor person. As an example of this, let's say a capitalist who has been successful hires a cleaning lady who's not as successful. The left says the capitalist is exploiting the cleaning lady. But the right, the conservative, says it's a valid transaction. And the transaction is that the capitalist puts in his information and knowledge, his time, his effort, and in an atmosphere of risk or opportunity. They're really two sides of the same coin. And he puts that, his time and effort and information and knowledge, and he sacrifices that to produce a reward. I'm sorry, I made a mistake here. It should be A. And on the other side, of course, the same thing is happening with the cleaning lady. She's putting in her time, she's putting in her effort, she's putting in her knowledge of how to clean a house, and she's got risk in that, and that she might have might hurt herself while she's cleaning that, and that's her sacrifice, and she receives a reward from the capitalist. So both sides are putting in their sacrifice to receive a commensurate reward. And the result is that we've discovered is that knowledge is wealth. In other words, the wealth and the opportunity on the capitalist side, he was able to produce a larger reward, and from that larger reward he can take smaller rewards and give them to other people which he might employ. Cleaning lady, gardener, might even take some of that reward and buy a new house with a swimming pool or whatever. But he's able to do this by the knowledge and risk and or opportunity, and applying it to his with his effort and time, just as the cleaning lady does, or the car dealer selling him the car, or whatever other product that he wishes. So now let's go to that New York Times editorial. Let's see if we can find it here. Here we go. Okay, they say right here, right up front, end the gun epidemic in America. It is a moral outrage and national disgrace that civilians can legally purchase weapons designed to kill people with brutal speed and efficiency. Okay. Now down here it says, later on in the article, but motives do not matter in the dead in California, nor did they in Colorado, Oregon, South Carolina, Virginia, Connecticut, and far too many other places. The attention and anger of Americans should also be directed at at the elected leaders whose job is to keep us safe, but who place a higher premium on the money and political power of an industry dedicated to profiting from the unfettered spread of an ever more powerful firearms. I'm going to bring in Rick here. Let's place this aside a little bit and get Rick on the screen. Rick, what do you think of this statement so far? You know what? Let me read one more portion here. It says here, these are weapons of war, barely modified and deliberately marketed as tools of macho vigilantism and even insurrection. What do you think? Is it really been that who kills more in America or throughout the world in the last century? Governments or individuals upon individuals? What do you think of this whole?
Well, surely,
Go ahead.
yeah, surely governments. I mean, year in and year out, more governments kill more people than individuals by some enormous factor. Uh, and I would observe that the United States has had guns. I think there are more than 300 million guns, latest count in the United States. But this country has had guns since its founding. Um, so the presence of, or widespread presence of guns in the society is certainly nothing new. Um, and why the New York Times chooses at this juncture to seize upon this issue in such a black and white fashion seems a little bit odd, given the fact that we have had guns as part of our civil culture for years and years and years, and they're protected by the Second Amendment.
Yeah. So, it's this statement right here. These are the weapons of war, barely modified and deliberately marked as tools of macho vigilantism and even insurrection. And before that, it seems to indicate that guns are better kept in the hands of the government than in the hands of individuals.
Yes.
Do you what do you think of that broad conclusion by the New York Times? Is it valid?
Well, it's an unconstitutional statement. So they are, they simply don't agree with the Second Amendment. They might not even agree with the Third Amendment, but they sorry they seem to favor this notion, which I think is fantasy. I mean, it's a bit like prohibition, right? Gargantuan efforts were made to eliminate drinking alcohol, or certainly producing alcoholic beverages in the United States. It all came to naught because the black market thrived, and eventually the amendment had to be repealed. I think the same kind of phenomenon would apply to guns if the New York Times were to follow this policy or advice or objective of trying to eliminate guns or certain types of guns uh, from the United States. A black market would spring up. The same has been true of drugs. And so at the end of the day, uh, I don't think they can credibly make the argument that people wouldn't continue being killed by guns. The guns are still here. You're never going to get rid of them, um, even through a policy of seizure. Uh, so the real question they seem to be alluding to is, should we ban certain types of guns that uh, you know have automatic firing and can deliver a rapid clip uh, of bullets in a very short period of time.
Well, that's true.
I mean, that's a debatable point.
Yeah, it's true. And let's in fact they bring that up in the article here. Let's read a little bit more. Opponents of gun control are saying, as they do after every killing, that no law can unfailingly forestall a specific criminal. That is true. They are talking, many with sincerity, about the constitutional challenges to effective gun regulation. These challenges exist. They point out that determined killers obtained weapons illegally in places like France, England, and Norway that have strict gun laws. Yes, they did. But at least those countries are trying. The United States is not. Worse, politicians abet would-be killers by creating gun markets for them, and voters allow those politicians to keep their jobs. It is past time to stop talking about halting the spread of firearms and instead to reduce their number drastically, eliminating some large categories of weapons and ammunition. I'm going to read one more sentence. It is not necessary to debate the particular wording of the Second Amendment. No right is unlimited and immune from reasonable regulation. Well, what do you think about that? Paris and all the other places that have experienced terrorism have strict gun laws. And yet, and the Times says, yeah, those countries are trying to eliminate that. That's good. Is it good?
Well, it is if you're, you know, wedded to moral grandstanding, and with so many of these liberal causes, you know, the feeling that you can be sanctimonious and declare your preference for what appears to be an idealistic and totally unattainable goal is, I guess, for them an end in and of itself. Whether it has any effect or not seems to be beside the point. And you find this time and time again, whether it's discussing welfare entitlements or anything else. The whole notion that uh, we are trying to do something that was intended to eliminate this or that evil in society is enough for us, even if the end result is that doesn't move the needle, or even in some cases makes it worse.
Right. So it's kind of like we're going to feel good about ourselves and pat ourselves on the back by trying, even though it's not going to do any good. At least we're going in the right direction. Seems to be that's what they say, even though it won't work. So, but let's put ourselves in today's light, in the midst of these incidences of terrorism, and pretend we're forming a new government as if we were back in in the colonial times and sitting around in Philadelphia trying to come up with a new document. Would we want to include the Second Amendment today is if we were making a new constitution.
Yes, I think so. I think there are a couple of reasons for that, actually. Um, One stems from the fact that the founding fathers were correct in understanding that uh, governments accrue power over time. It is in the nature of government to want to accrue as much power as possible over time. And one of the safeguards, not the only one, there are many safeguards that are written into the Constitution, but one of the safeguards that helps to control that natural progression is having a citizenry that can own weapons for their own protection. A second reason is that uh, you certainly wouldn't want a society where only the criminals had guns. A society in which no one could protect themselves from a potential break-in or some other evil act. Um, that is just that's putting the honest, law-abiding citizen at a disadvantage. And if we were to eliminate guns totally today, that is the situation you would have. And I think even the New York Times is implicitly acknowledging that.
Would that be the society that we would have constructed? Well, actually, would be as Europe is today.
Yes, certainly. With some notable exceptions, like Switzerland, for example, where there's universal conscription, and many Swiss households, as a matter of fact, have guns because Swiss the Swiss Army is composed of a largely volunteer force that can be called up at any time.
As Israel.
Right, same idea.
Legal carry just about anywhere, anytime.
I don't know what the legal carry rules are in Switzerland, but I know, you know, gun ownership is widespread.
Right. So really, it's necessary today as it was 200 years ago to have the Second Amendment. Uh, because I once read a government likes an unarmed peasantry. Then
Yeah,
and
one of the first acts of Hitler in the 30s was to confiscate all weapons from the populace. One of the
and
early acts
and I
of Hitler.
believe that is the first thing that every totalitarian leftist government throughout history has done. Actually, all governments throughout history. They pretty much just take away the arms of the populace so that they don't have any competition.
Right.
And this society is probably the only one throughout history that has done the opposite. Did we do the right thing?
Well, I would argue that so far it has worked. Uh, Obviously, violent crime in the United States is high and nothing to be proud of. But it's not the mass killings that account for the majority of murders. Most murders are individual acts of violence affecting one or two persons involved with some sort of crime, and they happen in the inner cities. And yet, I don't see the New York Times up in arms about the fact that you can have, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 murders in a weekend in one city. And by the way, that rate of crime has been going up of late. They don't seem to be up in arms about the Ferguson effect, which refers to the fact that uh, policemen now seem to be more hesitant to do the police work that they did prior to the Ferguson riots um, for fear of the consequence.
Right. And so here we are. Let's summarize these facts. One, governments throughout the last 100 years and well beyond are the major, have always had the guns, and they've produced in all societies except probably this one the killings, the mass killings of their own people. Hitler, Pol Pot, Mao, Stalin, and we can go back farther beyond that to see more examples. And if their populace in each of those respective times and countries had guns, it would seem to me things would have been very different. What do you think?
One would hope so, yes.
And yeah, they would be a little bit hesitant about doing what they did if there's a insubordinate, if there's a will to rebel and the means to be able to do that. Okay, Rick, I want to thank you for joining us. We're just about out of time here in the Philosophical Angle program, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I gotta go down and pick up groceries out of the car.